Morning, Mike. Morning, Mike. You're on. Well, I can't hear you.
You can.
I can now.
You
Excellent.
certainly can. I'm glad to see you're as well organised as I am, Marcus. Dan, good morning. I don't think we've met.
Good morning. Oh, good morning. Hope all is well.
Hello. Hi, Mike.
And Sam as well. Pat and Lahat will be along shortly. I've just been on a call with them. So with any luck.
Yeah, I think I prefer the mug behind you, Marcus, if I'm guessing correctly what it says on it.
Most definitely.
That's what I thought it said. This one, of course, is wishful thinking. I borrow this from my wife.
Of course. Through my blurry eyes, because I haven't got my specs on, I'm guessing that as it said B and S at the end, that was boss. So there you go. Excellent.
Yeah.
Now I have my specs on. I was right.
You certainly were.
It doesn't happen often. Hi, Pat. Right, we'll just wait one more minute.
Sorry,
And
good morning, good evening.
morning, evening.
Yeah, I suppose it is.
Sam,
Yes.
where are you based?
I'm in Australia,
You're in Australia.
Brisbane.
No, Sam.
Dan?
Tanea.
Oh, I'm in London now, Marcus. I've moved back.
Excellent. Okay, you moved back. You were in Saudi before, weren't you?
Yeah, I was there for 13 and a half years.
Wow.
Yeah, a long time.
Well, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, let's get started. Today is really about getting stories from the field, the reality of what it's like to live the seller code. I think we're all agreed that the profession desperately needs to be professionalized, and that customers deserve a hell of a lot better. And for me, the seller code is the baseline. It's the absolute minimum a customer should be able to expect from any seller. And I love the maxim that my co-author in Making Channel Sales Work told me when we had lunch last, says, I wouldn't want that done to me, and I wouldn't want to be someone who did it to someone else. And that's really the litmus test, isn't it? I mean, just being a decent human being. That, I think, as this is now my 8th recession, I am certain, based on the last 7, people will behave appallingly. And in order to differentiate, all you have to do is not behave appallingly.
Okay, so I'll kick off the conversation.
Please.
Is that an appropriate motivation to do it?
What, not behaving appallingly?
Yeah, I mean, is it? Yeah, is that the motivation? Is it, or should the motivation be, well, just do the right thing because it's the right thing to do?
I wasn't talking about the motivation, Pat. What I was talking about is the grim reality of things.
Yes, I understand that.
I don't think people set out to behave appallingly.
Pardon?
I don't think people set out to behave appallingly. I just don't. I'm not entirely sure they're aware of what they're doing.
I'm with you.
Yes.
I think it's a byproduct of fear, scarcity, and uncertainty, coupled with ignorance. It's not willful ignorance in most cases, because most people don't want to do a bad job. They want to do a good job, and they don't want to be in conflict. They want to succeed. But the problem is, what they've learned is traditional selling, which is entirely self-serving. Dan.
Probably add weakness to that as well. It's the old adage that, in order for evil to
Yeah.
flourish, good men just need to do nothing.
And that's
Yeah, but
exactly what's happened.
but I'm with Mike. I think most people are actually well intended. They just don't understand the impact of their behavior. Okay, let me tell you my theory. My theory is that traditional selling, as we call it, is actually in our DNA. We evolved to sell that way, to talk about ourselves, debating. It's basically influencing, convincing. I mean, that's in our DNA. How do we convince people? What happened was that, and it kind of worked pretty well right up until last century, where people had no other source of information and they relied on others to sort of tell them. Now, with the advent of the internet, people have got the ability to go and actually source information themselves. So by the time they actually contact you, they no longer, in a sense, want information like they used to. They just want a quote or whatever else it is. I remember back in my day that I could get back at grey hair, right? So ancient. Back in the traditional days of selling, you didn't have a lot of, when they called them sales representatives rather than BDMs and anything but sales, you used to be able to get to buyers because you were a source of information. When they were thinking, when they first thought about buying something, they called you in because they needed to learn about whatever it is they wanted to buy. You were a source of information. That changed, I think, with the advent of the internet. But we still got that DNA, which is to sort of convince and pitch and whatever. And that's why it's so hard to overcome.
I'm going to go back to the conversation we had with Todd Capone last week, because that was really instructive. Because what's called traditional sales by us and nowadays actually is anything but traditional. Traditional selling was all about the relationship. It was all about choice, and it was underpinned with purpose. And about 56 years ago, when Milton Friedman sold The Great Lie, Milton Friedman threatened to sue any leader or any board member who proposed to do a public good because he considered that against shareholder value. That's the cult, because not enough people stood up and said, that's monstrous. And in 2018, I think it was Morgan Stanley, but don't quote me on that, ran a webinar, which was, is curing people a good business model?
Yeah, they did, yeah.
I mean, what sort of satanic thinking do you have to come from?
Hang on a bit. Have you read a book called The Corporation?
Yeah, ages ago.
Okay, well, what it basically does is it talks about the beginnings of companies, which was back in the 18th century, okay? And it's in fact true. The role of a company is to make profit and benefit its shareholders. It is not a charitable. In fact, companies doing good works, the shareholders have reasonable objections like, why did you donate such and such money? I'm not invested in you. If I want to make a donation, I'll go and do it myself. It's not your role to donate my money. Your role is to make a profit. And that is in fact the brief of a corporation. That's if a shareholder cares to sue you, they actually have a case. Because they don't have, and so what has to happen?
Just because you can, should you? We are all very skilled salespeople who have learned over the years very manipulative, very coercive tactics. We've been surrounded by people who are happy to apply those, encourage salespeople to employ them. I know I've been complicit in this. And I want to make amends, because if we don't speak up, who will? I believe that we as sellers occupy a leadership role because buyers come to us to help them make decisions they don't want to or are afraid to make on their own. Otherwise, they would be buying off the internet. Now, for important strategic purchases, maybe not for a Mars bar, but for something that is going to have long-term ramifications. And if I am the person whose signature is on the contract, I want to know that I'm not going to end up with egg on my face. So As a buyer, what I want is an ally from my salespeople. And instead, what we've done is over the last 56 years is we have created an adversarial or a codependent type of relationship where we've created a surrogate parent-child relationship with employees. Now, that's often been the case. But there are a bunch of really unreasonable expectations we have of each other. As an employee, my expectation of my boss is that you're going to hire me, you're going to look after me in my ups, you're going to pat me on the back and give me rewards. In my downs, you're going to lift me up. You're going to take care of me, you're going to train me, you're going to coach me. And let's face it, we both know that I'm more talented than you are. So when the time is right, step aside, sunshine. Okay? Now, the unreasonable, impossible contract that management has with sales is you're my property. You exist to serve me and my outcomes. Your job is to help me be successful. Your job is to help me look successful. And my foibles are nice little quirks that are quite endearing. And when you talk to other people about me, you tell them that I am the best manager you've ever had, probably the best manager in the world, and definitely the best manager in this company. Now, neither side can be happy. And in sales, we have exactly the same sort of impossible contracts. Because what we don't do is we don't co-create from the adult to adult position. We always do it from a parent-child if we're operating in the sort of modern version of traditional selling, which is numbers, technology, data, factory process. And the things that are missed are choice, purpose, and relationship. And what they're sacrificed for are the illusion of efficiency, an overburdensome bias towards finance, and an over-reliance on stuff that financial people find easy to measure. And if you look at who built most of those models, they're economists who have failed mathematicians. That's not a good model. It's all built on sand, and it sucks value out of the system, and it just creates the conditions where people want to behave badly in order just to relieve the pressure, or have to feel they have to behave badly. And I think we have to tackle it at the management level, a leadership level, and at a sales level. And we've got to pick single questions that bring them all together. Thoughts? I'm going on mute. I'll never let you talk.
Well, getting back to my earlier comment, I still think it's somewhat more fundamental than that. Some of these behaviors are firmly entrenched, okay? And to get to Mike's point, not even aware we're doing it. What I've learned, and I've been coaching, this for quite some time now, coaching people in buyer-centric behavior. In other words, don't talk about yourself, don't talk about your product, inhabit the other buyer's world. Make great sense, but it's really difficult to entrench it and do it. No matter how well intended, you just slip into talking about your product or whatever. I mean, it's just a conditioned reflex. That's what we do. And I think with our
well, do we hire them that way, or do we make them that way? Because I think that's a product of conditioning.
No, I was just about to answer that. Now we know, in the last 20 years or so, we've learned so much more about psychology and behavior. We know so much of this stuff gets back, as I said, to a DNA. Our nature is humans. And what I've discovered, and just call me an amateur psychologist, just basically reading up on this stuff. It's these patterns of behavior that we've used to have, and it's very hard to change. And I think that's where we need to tackle it from the point of view of how do you bring about this behavioral change. It's more of an issue to do. Yeah. Sorry, Mike. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And that's exactly the experience I have. I mean, when I'm training people, almost always they intellectually buy in to the logic of understanding the customer first and shutting up about what they do and their products until they fully understand. But intellectually buying into it and then actually going out and doing it are two completely different things. Because, you know, the minute they get out, then they default back to their normal mode of operation.
Well,
And I think
isn't it very binary?
yeah, one of the things that allows them to do that is that there is simply not the level of coaching and support out there to continually encourage them and help them to break that default model. So
Well,
they
that's
go
what
back into
community
their
is about,
comfort
though.
zone.
It's create the whole idea of the seller code community is to bring people together so that we can support each other through this journey. Because God knows you're not going to get it from your management.
Yeah, but
Well,
getting
you
back
see,
to
again,
getting back to Mike's point, that addresses the intellectual thing. Everyone buys into it. But the problem with, in fact, what needs to happen, how you do this, how you have conversations and get used to doing it without mentioning your product or yourself, is through repetitive practice, role play. You do it over and over and over
yes,
again until
yes.
it's embedded. And we talk about coaching in the sense of, well, bring in some outsider, run a course. Forget it. I mean, that's not what happens. It's got to happen on the ground with this repetitive behavior. Sorry, repetitive until we become.
Yeah.
We have to recondition people, right? And
Well,
I think
How many times, Pat, have you actually done training? Because I will never go into a business. One of the first things I say is, look, whatever we do, are you going to coach it and support it on an
yes,
absolutely yes, of course we are. We're definitely going to do that. We've got a
How?
fantastic coaching culture in this business. You go away and absolutely nothing happens. And
exactly.
that comes back to what Marcus was saying. It's a management and a leadership problem.
Yes,
Because when I talk to sales managers and say, why aren't you doing this? The number one answer is always, we don't have the time.
yes.
Well, if a manager's results are dependent upon the results of the sales team, I would have thought you would want to invest time in the one route you have to
they
success.
want to, but they don't know how to make the time.
Well, I was going to say, I think time is the number one reason they give you, and partially that is an excuse, but partially that's
Absolutely.
because their leaders are forcing them to do things which are not contributing.
So what's the
to
question
getting
we
the
should
sales
really
team.
be asking then?
Well, I'll give you an example. Just keep it amongst us girls. But one company I work with is ABB. I don't know if you know them, a big Swiss company, working with their energy division. And these guys were bidding projects, multi-million-dollar projects. On average, it costs them $300,000 to bid on a job, $300,000. And I've got a group of them in a room, and I'm saying, what's your win rate on these? And they said 5%. 5%. 5% was their win rate. And so I'm talking about sales training and coaching. And I said, well, what's the problem here? They said, we don't have the time. So I said, you're spending 95% of your time losing business. Do you think you could bite into that time to maybe learn how to win some? And they stopped and they said, yeah, I see your point. And seriously, talking about intellect, they hadn't joined those dots. They hadn't, and that's the dots that, on average, salespeople win 20% of their sales, 20, 30%, right? They spend 70, 80% of their time losing. That's the time that you want to spend on learning, coaching, right? To get better at it.
Well, what you just did there is an example of what I think we need to be able to do, which is to create a really good immediate contrast that is deeply personal. When the contrast is made or the question is asked, it forces the person into a position where they have to betray something. They either betray their current status quo or they betray the person they claim they want to be in the future. And it creates tension. It's that combination is really powerful. So a question I want to ask of our community is, how are you complicit in creating the conditions you say you want to replace with the conditions of the seller code? What is it that you're doing or failing to do? Because I think that we should be really subversive as a movement. I think what we should be doing is enlisting sellers, AEs, SDRs and have them put up their hand and say, you know, this isn't working. I think we need to do a quick reset. Because leaders are leaders because of how they behave, how they act, not their titles. And let's face it, most of the people who have been moved into management are accidental managers, and they're not well geared towards it. Before Jonathan Farrington died, he did a survey, and he found that 94% of sales managers were not fit for purpose. Now, that's a really damning indictment when you consider they have an average of 7 to 8 people reporting to them. Well, that's 7 to 8 people who could be whispering in the ear of the manager and saying, well, hang on a second, you say this, but you're creating the conditions for that. We refuse.
But there's another interesting question. You're absolutely right. They should be doing that, but they're not. And, one of the things that tends to happen is you've got a lousy manager. You don't actually say to the manager, you're lousy. You go and get another job. You find something that's more conducive to what you're wanting to do. I think this is all part of the problem. And I find that there's an awful lot of mediocrity out there in the sales universe. There's too much acceptance of okay being okay. So everybody is average, and the average is pretty low, to be honest. And those people there's so few people, so few sellers who are prepared to stick their hands in the air and say, look, we're not getting enough coaching, we're not getting enough support. But I don't see many of them around.
Let me bring Dan in. What would you like to see? I mean, you've been a business owner, you're a seller, you're considering your future direction, and you're young enough to still have another 20 years ahead of you in your sales and management career. How would you like to see the profession evolve, and why?
For me, I would want it. This is for me, and this probably doesn't mesh with most, FTSE 500 companies or equivalent in all.
We're not interested in them. We're interested in you and your opinion only.
So I would want more bohemian people who will come in and challenge me. They're slightly more unconventional. And what I mean by unconventional is that we live in a society where the money markets are reported first thing in the morning. We hear politicians going on about the economy. We see MPs putting up their wages above inflation when people are struggling. We see them gaming the system. We trade with nations with appalling human rights records. We will go to war to save, 10 cents on a barrel of oil. We will put people in prison for financial fraud for hundreds of years, but if you murder somebody, you get 15. And so you're asking modern salespeople, to operate in an environment where that is prevalent. And I think the pressures that these, as Mike suggested, these managers who are average, and average isn't great, they just have all these pressures on them. And I'm not sure how at the moment we would challenge how we find those people. It's got to be as a grassroots movement. It's not going to start from the top. It's going to be a grassroots movement, and have people coming in and saying, well, actually, I think the remuneration that I earn should be based on different values to the ones that we've had, rather than just ramming boxes into people.
Well, let me ask you.
I think it's a case of, I agree with that. I think it's a case of there've got to be pitchforks in the street. It's as some billionaire said, I can't think of his name off the top of my head, when he was talking about the general malaise, he was talking about the US now, that we're setting up for that. And I guess that's what a lot of people that follow the MAGA movement are really all about, right? They're the pitchforks in the street. Unfortunately, got the wrong punter in the front, but it's the same thing, right? They see it as rebelling against the establishment, the fat cats, stuff like that. And I think you're right. I think that some of them, the incentive isn't there to change.
We're talking about a global shift in not only the balance of power, but also in the balance of wealth. Wealth inequality at the moment is like the Mongol hordes. It's not stopping. And if you can imagine 100,000 howling horsemen firing 6 arrows a minute, that's basically what's happened to the economy because of asset owners pulling stuff out. The economy always balances out to zero between creditors and debtors. If someone has money, it's been created by creating debt and lending it. And economists then consider both people to have the money. So what you end up with is this system that creates cumulative advantage and skews things. So we've got not only the income inequality, but we have lobbying and we have a tax system that allows the asset owners to drag more value out of the system. Every single man, woman, and child in the United Kingdom has incurred £14,000 worth of debt in the last 4 years through government borrowing. I didn't see it, neither did any of my family, neither did most of my friends. But someone did. And on average, those people got between £100,000 and £200,000, which they then put straight into buying assets, which then created inflation. So we have a moment in history where there is this enormous social unrest. 50% of all democracies have a general election in 2024. There is a tendency in all of these elections for it to polarize and go to one extreme or the other. And generally, it's going more nationalistic, more religious, more far right. And we're moving towards a war footing. In the UK press, we are now hearing generals talking about preparing for war. We're hearing economists talking about preparing for war. Okay, so the 1920s and 1930s is being mirrored with alarming similarities. So we need to be prepared to trade in that kind of environment because most of us are too old to be called up. If you're in Europe or in Israel, you have war on your doorstep. And there is a huge push in terms of geopolitics, this shift, and there are 3 superpowers. There's the US and Britain and our bloc, there's China and Russia and their bloc, and then there are the tech companies. Because the tech companies have more power and more money and more influence than almost every country on the planet. And that power struggle means that what's happening is it's going to make it really hard to trade, and people will continue to be afraid, consider that there is scarcity and uncertainty, and that generally triggers really shitty primal behavior, and people discount prematurely and pointlessly. They get more desperate, they lie, they coerce, they manipulate, they omit, they exaggerate. And in answer to your earlier question, I think it's really simple. It's very binary. How do we enlist our buyer's brain to be our ally instead of making it our adversary? Well, simply don't create the conditions where cortisol and adrenaline are triggered. So don't give them reason to perceive you in any way, shape, or form as a risk. And trigger dopamine. Because in times of uncertainty and stress, people will look for that kind of calm. So we want to be sought out. It is that binary. All of you have that kind of relationship with some people. So why don't we just replicate that?
So not disputing anything you're saying, Marcus, but apropos the context of this session, what can we practically do about that? I mean, one of the challenges I see with this whole movement is it sounds more like a vitamin pill than a headache tablet. And what businesses want, what business leaders want, what salespeople want, they want a headache tablet, right? They want, we're just orientated that way. We need a quick return. And this doesn't sound like it's a quick return, right? This is a lifestyle issue. It's like getting fit or something like that. But I want a quick fix. How can I do it? You know? So
They can't have it. They
well,
just can't have it.
well, hang on a sec. That you may say that, but if that's where people's heads are, we can't re-educate them. We need to work with it. We first need to be relatable. It's a selling exercise, right? We can't say that, well, sorry, that's just what you got to do. We got to be smarter than that. And yeah, a really good metaphor for what we're talking about. I don't know if you heard of it, as it Jonathan Haidt in his book, The Happiness Hypothesis, I think it is, talks about, you know, our system 1 and system 2 brains, as Daniel Kahn characterized them. The system 1 is our emotional brain, our emotional mind, and system 2 is our thinking mind. And the emotional one is the one we're in 95% of the time, right? And Haidt sort of uses the metaphor of an elephant and its rider. So our emotional brain is the elephant, and the intellectual one is the rider. Now, what we need, the intellect might get on board. The problem is there's a disparity in strength. No matter what the intellect wants, if the elephant doesn't want it, then it's not going to happen, right? And that's why 50% of people don't make a buying decision, even notwithstanding the logic that they ought to. It's the emotional brain says, kicks in, says, nah, better stick the same, you know, better the devil we know. So what we need to do is find a path for the elephant that makes it easy for their emotional brains to go along with this change. So their logical brain says, oh yeah, all of this seller code stuff is really, really good, but shit, I've got to get my quarter meantime. And I'll get around to it. So I think that the secret we're looking for here is, how do we give this an immediacy?
I'm going to challenge you on that. And I think that's thinking, trying to get people to make a decision and coerce them, and it's parenting. I think what we do is we offer them and invite them very simple, small steps. What seems to be working beautifully is inviting people simply to go and have a look at the seller code page. If it resonates, then come back, and it's worth having a conversation. Maybe add it to your email signature. Add it as a web page, send an email before, and people are sending that email, and it seems to work at creating a slightly different setup in terms of people's expectations when you first meet. We're not getting back yet. It's only just been tested with a handful of people, so we can't say one way or the other. I think the key is tiny incremental steps that are risk-free, that are painless, that cost nothing. And each time people are activating a little bit more commitment. And eventually we then get to ask them, what is it you're willing to do? What commitment, what promise are you willing to make in order to achieve the outcome? By the end of this year, my hope is that we can get 10,000 people to add the sellercode.org to their email signature. By the end of next year, 100,000, and the year after, 1 million. I mean, how do we do that? How do we list 1 million people over the next 3 years to add the seller code?
I agree with you, but just hang on a sec. If you interpreted what I said before as coercive, then I must have just described it wrong, because it was anything but. What I said was, we need to find a path that the elephant can easily follow. Like, for example, put an email signature in. That's not hard. Those are the types of things that we need, I think, to find more of those sorts of things, rather than some monumental revolution where someone thinks they're going to have to change the thinking of their company or whatever. Then that all gets too hard. You know what I mean? It's how can putting an email signature in, everyone can do that. Every
I think
sales
actually, if you look at what is in the seller code, I can't imagine any company looking at that and disagreeing with any of it. But the question is it then reflected in their behavior?
Well,
and that is where
are
the
they
problem
willing
is.
to be accountable to it?
Yeah, it's not going to be difficult to get somebody to put the seller code on as a link on the bottom of their email signature, but it's a lot more difficult getting them to live it in a practical sense. That's where the real challenge lies, as I see it.
And my thinking with this is once you put something in writing, it changes you. And if I put that link on my signature and my customer, because what I do before I meet someone is I send them a very brief email saying, looking forward to meeting you. Have a peek at the seller code if you get some time. It's not legal. It's simply the way I like to do business. Check it out and please hold me to account if I've ever failed to meet those standards. And that then sets the bar. Because if I show up and I fail to meet their expectation of what all the seller code terminology tells us, then they're not going to do business with me because I will have broken their trust. So I have to turn up and be better. I love the fact that Pascal's wager in reverse: assume there is no God and behave excellently because it's the right thing to do. And if there is one,
Just
you
in
get
case.
extra brownie points because you didn't have someone over your shoulder telling you had to do it.
Do we not suffer those, trainers, potential trainers, of having all these decades of programming that we actually want to get quick results for the clients, just as they want quick results in their business, we want that, but we have to understand that this is a cultural shift that is going to take probably a long time, particularly, depending on how big the client is or whether the C-suite are receptive to it.
That's a
I
very
think it's a good point, Dan. And I mean,
a lot of sales trainers are, that's a
I
problem.
agree. I absolutely agree. And I'm with you, Dan. I mean, I think anybody who believes that actually doing training and that it's like turning on a switch and suddenly everything's going to be different are living in cloud cuckoo land.
It's magic dust, Mike.
Yeah,
Sorry?
I think
It's magic dust. We sprinkle magic dust and they're suddenly fixed.
It's just ridiculous. I
very
mean, again,
easy-
it's our job, I think, as trainers to manage our clients' expectations. And, if you, as I said, people intellectually buy into the fact that they should be doing the things on the seller code. They know they should be buyer-centric. They know they should be spending time understanding the customer before they start to talk about what they can do. They know all of those things. But as we said, the problem is they default to the thing they feel the most comfortable about, and that's talking about their products and services.
One book that I'm sure some of you have probably read it that I'm reading at the minute, I haven't got through it all, but is Cal Newport's new book, Slow Productivity. And the epithet on it is The Lost Art of Accomplishment Without Burnout. And he talks about three major sort of pillars. Do fewer things, work at a natural place, and obsess over quality. And I probably sent Marcus some text the other night saying, this book dovetails perfectly with the seller code. This is exactly what we're trying to achieve. And when I've read through it, it's gonna leave me. I'll probably need to read it again because it's really, really interesting book. But I recommend it. So Cal Newport, Slow Productivity. I think
the other book that I absolutely urge everyone to read is Giving Voice to Values by Mary Gentile, spelt Gentile. Absolutely fantastic. And if you are a young seller and you're being asked to do things that you don't want to do because it stinks, then read this book, because simple stuff like, can I ask a question? Is that set in stone, or are you open to a discussion? I mean, it's not hard to ask that question, but most people won't think to ask it because they don't think they have permission. I think we need to equip people with those sorts of skills.
There is a grassroots movement. I mean, since lockdowns happened, there have been a lot of people that have become very entrepreneurial, people that are working together. people that own, say, larger gardens that are letting neighbours grow food in their gardens, and different cooperatives that have sprung up all over the place. So I think that there is a really great opportunity at the minute. That's my feeling. The circles I'm moving in, anyway. There's a lot of people out there. I mean, there's a story in the newspaper this morning about some guy who's started a glamping business and is doing very well, and that's because they work and they're sharing resources with other neighbours. And so I think that there is a hunger for this out there.
I believe there is. There's definitely an appetite. We win people over one person at a time, and that we do it slowly in stages, because we've already made that leap. We've gone through the grist mill. We've suffered. We've inflicted the shit on other people, and we've reached this conclusion now. Other people might be earlier in their journey, and I think we have to understand what it was like when we first started out. We were making those same mistakes, and we were looking around thinking, this isn't working. But there weren't people around to help us. I mean, some of you, Pat, had great mentors. I didn't, until I joined my franchise. And then, in all honesty, I bought into the cult and the techniques and the tactics. And it was better than what I was doing. But now I've left and I've had time to really think deeply about it. All of that stuff is really about trying to get control. Now, as a buyer, I don't want to be controlled. I don't want to be handled. I don't want to be closed. I want someone who is on my side, helping me achieve what I want. I don't want someone who's bringing their agenda. And so I think part of the message here has to be, how do we shift thinking from I win, you win, or I win, and I don't really care what happens to you as long as I don't lose, or I win, you lose, which are the three more common versions, to you win, then I win as a symptom.
Well, the irony of this conversation, of course, is that all sellers are buyers too. We're the same human beings, right? So we're just in a different mode. And I think if we just reflect on that, and one of the things I typically when I used to run live training programs, one of the first things I used to ask was, would you buy from you? And people sort of sit back, look a bit askance, and 90% of people said no. They hadn't sort of reflected on it, because they in fact would not like to be treated the same way that they treat everyone else.
And you've touched on the most important issue here, which is it's about self-awareness.
Exactly. And we humans are not particularly self-aware. Yeah, that
I think is where we can start to hold up a mirror. Well, I think by acting as examples in how we behave, that's one thing, but also by creating really interesting questions. And there are three qualities to questions, which again, I have to credit Peter Block for. He says that the best questions, I love these type of questions, are deeply personal. They cause you to betray someone or something who you were, who you claim you want to be, and they create tension. So a favorite question of that I'm using nowadays is, Mike, tell me something. Tell me about the crossroads you're at in life and your career. Yeah, that's a wonderfully powerful question, because they can't game it. And I think we need to be asking really difficult questions, not because we want people to react or even to engage with the content, but we want the question to act like a little brainworm. And if we ask enough of these questions, we can enroll them onto a daily question.
Excuse me.
I've preparing 4 years. I've already got them, but I need to rejig them now that I've done some tweaks. But 4 years of daily self-reflection questions. just one question a day to hold up the mirror and say, who am I? And am I living my values? But looking at it through a slightly different lens each time. Like, if it takes me 3 years to enlist someone, I'm cool with that. I'm not in a hurry.
How do we find people earlier though? Because one of my sons is doing business studies A level, and some of the stuff they're being taught is
Right.
went out with the arc basically, but they're still being taught it by teachers who are not in the business world. They're delivering the syllabus. That's how it is.
Well, that's a whole other subject, Dan, isn't it? The education system, which is fundamentally broken. I think the interesting thing is that we come out of the womb with the characteristics that make an excellent salesperson. We're naturally curious, right? And curiosity, I suggest, along with self-awareness, are the most important attributes of a salesperson. Just be curious, interested, ask questions, But we beat that out of kids when we put them into our education system, and we start, we eliminate the curiosity.
Have you read what's Ken Robinson's talk on how school?
Of course.
We kill creativity.
Yeah, of course. And the best salespeople are creative. I mean, they immediately relate to buyers because they come up with have you tried this? What happens when you do that? And they're not talking about their product or anything. They're talking about a process, right? In terms of, so what have you already done to address this? Okay. And what did you discover from that? Just a natural conversation sequence.
Yeah.
And because really our role is to get back to what Marcus was saying, no one wants to be sold. Our role is really to empower, to give people the wherewithal to make their own decisions. And that's what we should be doing with our kids too, right? We should be empowering them, and we don't do that. And it's sad. In fact, and I was just listening to an economist podcast yesterday, in fact, and it's actually getting worse. They just did a recent study around the world, and what's been happening is that there was this thought that kids are actually improving and getting brighter, but what's been happening is they've just been dropping the bar to make it easy for them to pass exams so they can get high pass rates. But in fact, the level of knowledge is less than what they had before. I mean, it's really disturbing.
So, yeah, I'm just wondering how.
This is all about mediocrity, isn't it? This is all about the fact that people are accepting mediocrity.
Well, we've always accepted. That's my. In fact, I'm writing a book, and I've been writing a book for a while. But my opening gambit with it is about mediocrity in sales. It's a terribly mediocre. I said 80% of people spend 80% of their time failing. I mean, what other profession does that happen in? Now, here's the other irony. When you ask them, typically, so what are you going to do? Oh, I'm going to find more leads. So that's like filling a leaky bucket. It's like, can you imagine a plumber where 50%, 80% of his jobs fail?
Well, it's worse than that, Pat, though.
What are you going to do? Oh, I'm going to find more clients.
Yeah, but Pat, it's way worse than that. Because when they fill the top of the leaky bucket, it's putting massive pressure on. So actually, it's like putting water into a 1 meter tube at the top, and it's 1 centimeter at the bottom. The damage that is then created downstream because of the additional workload and the knock-on effects. Because if you create more pipeline, more salespeople have to then follow up. The average number of follow-up touches required for a warm inbound is 6 to 11 at the moment. For a cold lead, it's 33 to 46. That's just to get 1 effective. On average, you need 14 effectives to get 1 first meeting. And on average, salespeople blow 7 out of 8 first meetings and never get invited back. Well, if you don't do any of that stuff, you suddenly free up about 99.9955% of people's time.
We've probably got 5 times as many salespeople as we really need.
Yeah.
It's a real example of Pareto's law. About 10% of salespeople win 90% of the sales. The others are just Fill in the chair.
So I want to ask a really painful question then, and I'd like to bring Itzhak and Lahat in for this. Okay, did we hire them that way, or did we make them that way?
Very interesting question. And it goes to the heart of what the role of the manager, sales manager is as well, isn't it? In terms of recruiting the right talent before we even begin. If you start with poor material to begin with, it's going to be very hard to get the quality of the end result that you're looking for. So
I would say, you know, notwithstanding what you said about what happened to you when you joined the franchise you're in, Marcus, and you basically, I'm not going to say drank the Kool-Aid because that sounds a bit too harsh, but
It was absolutely. I joined the cult
yeah,
because the system seemed to work like magic, and I fell in love with the technique. So then it became a weapon. I remember in my third year how good I was at doing pain discovery, but it then became a game, and it was all about me proving how good I was. It wasn't about the customer. And then my sales went, because what I forgot was the relationship actually mattered and the customer's outcome mattered, not my ego.
There's a balance in all of these things, though, isn't there, somewhere? And I think this is where that role of coaching becomes so important, so that you can help and support people as they're going through those sorts of stages in their sort of mental appreciation of what they're supposed to do.
does this go, I mean, this goes back to why did you found your company? What good are you hoping to imprint on the world? Okay, yes, we all need to make a living, but how are you planning to leave the world a better place? And if you can do that, then what are we looking for in salespeople? And do we either need to hire them ready-made, or can we change people back to being human? Because, you know, to sell is to be human, as Pat, you know, alluded to earlier.
And I pick up on Pat's point, absolutely. The number one criteria I would look for in any salesperson I was recruiting is a natural curiosity, a genuine interest in people and understanding what makes them tick.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can train everything else. You can train product knowledge, all of that sort of stuff. But what you cannot train people to do is be naturally curious.
Well, I think there are 4 pillars. The first one is deep listening, because they've weaponized active listening into this terrible technique for rapport build. Then really powerful questioning, provocative questioning, challenging question that makes or creates the conditions where the buyer advances their understanding, sees around corners, looks into the future with clarity, and real empathy. Just not this, let's try and understand your needs. Understand as that other person understands them, sees it, as they hear it, they feel what they feel. And then acumen. Those are the 4 pillars. And everyone fixates on technique, but actually what we should focus on is communication and relationship.
I don't agree with those.
Okay, argue.
I'm with Mike. I agree with curiosity, and I think the other one, as I mentioned before, was self-awareness. I think to add provocative questions, I think that potentially is a real skill, and frankly, I think it's unnecessary. I think that if you're curious and you know how to engage with someone, then you can. They will come up. They will elicit. That's the whole point. You get them to sort of reveal and open up. The bit. You don't need to ask a provocative question. What you need to be able to do is to listen effectively, which comes with curiosity. You're not much good at being curious if you can't listen. And not to listen for. The trouble is our listening is loaded. Most salespeople are listening for cues. They're listening for, well, the needs exploration. It's really a case of listening to see, well, what might I be able to sell them, right? They're conditioned. Instead, we should just listen, have no stake in the conversation. And that's why I'm against provocative. That's why I'm against the type of questioning you suggest. It has a place sometimes, but what I suggest to sellers is have no stake in the game. Don't assume you're going to make a sale. Just be curious and learn about the other person. I think one of the challenges with salespeople, we prepare them too much to go into the call. And so they're going in the call with an agenda, they're conditioned, they're filtering. All of that doesn't work in terms of if you really want to understand people, just be curious. I think the best preparation for being a salesperson, they're going to do a study, is a psychology degree.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. However,
I'm coaching a couple of psychologists.
empathy and listening are all about curiosity, and they fuel the questions.
Okay,
And
so no,
being able to put them into context is the key. Because
yeah.
if your question is not timely, it's not relevant, it's not valuable, it doesn't help them gain clarity on the reality of their situation. It doesn't advance them by helping them to understand what is possible and within their reach. And it doesn't help them move towards making a good decision. Well, you shouldn't ask it.
Yeah, but I think, okay, so here's my other thing that I guess I get on a soapbox about. We do not understand empathy. 90% of people do not understand empathy. They conflate empathy with perspective taking, and they're two different things.
Or
understanding. Well, perspective taking is understanding what people think about something. And when we say, oh, I want to know how they think or whatever, I want to get on their page, that is not empathy. That is perspective taking. That is understanding how they see things. Empathy is the next question. How do you feel about that? And that's getting in touch with the emotion. And we don't ask that. We ask questions like, do you think this, or what do you think of that? We are not used to asking the question, oh, how do you feel about that? And that is the question that salespeople need to learn how to ask, so that when someone turns around and says, oh, I've got, 10% downtime, and we say, oh yeah, why is that? Why? And we go through the technical discussion. So how do you feel about that? Well, actually, I'm really embarrassed about it. My boss is all over me like a rash. That's getting to the real understanding of that guy's perception of value. They want to be released from that pain of having their boss all over them, and that's not what salespeople do.
Well,
So,
again, my thinking on this has evolved dramatically. I think if we use the binary
see
model,
you keep on, Marcus. You turned your.
I don't know.
What
But
did I need to?
if we think about the binary model, either producing adrenaline and cortisol or dopamine, I think what we need to do is enlist the buyer's brain as our ally instead of making it our adversary, or being their accomplice in propagating what they're doing already that doesn't work. So when it comes to training, for example, I think what we need to do is we need to be much more challenging as trainers or coaches before we go into any organization, and take the management to task and deal with those issues, and talk to them about the effects. But we need to enlist them. I think what we've got to remember is that there is a job to be done by the business. Now, realistically, in many of them, it's to keep the shareholders happy. We understand that. But the question I like to ask is, how do we keep the shareholders happy, and in fact make them even happier, whilst creating the conditions people want to come to work and customers want to buy from? That seems to be a more interesting question than how can we keep putting sticking plasters on the cancer?
So what do you think, Lahat? You've been there studiously listening. Have you noticed any pearls of wisdom? I won't be offended.
I think everyone makes a good point. Everyone makes a good point for that. And you talked, and I thought to myself, this is the root of the problem: is the managers or the salespeople. And you mentioned about the empathy, you mentioned about curiosity and everything. But I think that's the reason we see some difference between salespeople. And it's up to you if you want to make the change or not. Because you make a good point, Patrick. When you talked about the 20% closing ratio, I think, by the way, this is much less. I wish it was 20. It was 20 in the past.
It's hard to get those stats. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think if we go 20 or 30 years ago, if we came back with those results, we get fired. No one will accept that. So today, people, unfortunately, managers accept that. And all the time asking myself, and Dan mentioned this, and Mike mentioned this, it's about you have some pressure from your manager to bring the deal. And you're asking yourself, what should I do? Should I spend time in changing the way I'm selling, or should I run around my numbers? And I think this is a big journey for us and for all the people who like to get better. And I don't think there's a silver bullet that everyone can take it or appeal or quick wins for that. So it's going to be a journey, and people should choose if to join or not. And this is like a baby step, but it will take time. And I think if someone really appreciates and really love to work in this profession, he really care about it, he must make the change in order to do that. But in the other end, this is something really important to mention. You can take an advantage and get a high result because other people won't do the work.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a big opportunity for everyone who wants to excel.
I tell you something.
Can I bring Sam in? Because we haven't heard from Sam yet. Sam, what is it you want from this community? What is it you want from the Seller Code community in terms of helping you?
Well, look, when I stumbled upon the Seller Code and having gone through it, for me, this is the ideal world of how salespeople should behave in public, to be honest. And I completely agree with it. You have to sell with integrity. Integrity was a word I didn't even think about when it came to sales. When I started sales, you probably remember when VMGs, when I started markets on time, my career in sales.
Yep.
So, even looking back, when you started in sales position, which was my first sales role, you was given a script, you was given a step, ask questions, try and close early. And I think this is what's been embedded in salespeople ever since salesperson who started their career. So, I mean, for me, it does. I do the managers. I do sometimes. It's not could not even be the manager's fault. It could be the CEO who's putting pressure on the manager, and and vice versa.
Let me ask you, what is it you actually want, though? You're here for something. What can this group, this community, give you that you can't get somewhere else, or that you're looking for? What are you hoping for from this? How can we serve you?
I think it's a way of life, the way of doing business. The way, if you are, I guess, with the way we're selling, you want to make sure that you are doing it correctly. You are doing it in an honourable manner. Okay. You are meeting the customer's needs, not your needs.
Tell me this.
Yeah.
What do you want to be better? Describe what that looks like a year from now, in your world only. Don't worry about everyone else.
Yeah.
What will have changed as a result of your engagement in this community, and what you do with it, with what you learn?
It's trust and respect. It's been respected by the community. It's been trusted by your fellow clients, to the point that if you give them advice or give them your opinion, they will take it. They will not see you below par. So I guess it's a mutual respect in the game, really.
Dan?
Well, I mean, this used to be heresy, particularly when you were coaching me, Marcus, but I would say that sales is the place to get your needs met. It used to, I was taught that it was definitely a place where if you couldn't kill, you couldn't sell, and we know all those epithets from Sandler. I would say that the bonding and rapport bit was tacked onto the front like some sort of battery-powered sex aid to get the process going, get everybody happy. And really, that should be an umbrella that is through the whole process, but also the relationship that you maintain with that person you sold to. Even if you don't sell to them for another 5 years afterwards, they don't need. Maybe you're selling big plant machinery. You're keeping in touch with them. You're keeping a human relationship going. That's where I see it.
It used to be the sea of bonding and rapport, but most of Sandler's clients were high Ds, and they forgot to do any of it. So they put a compartment on, and then it became technique. And you see this because it was so influential in all the other methodologies that followed it because it was groundbreaking.
Yeah, I'm not picking on Sander
No,
particularly.
no, no.
They all do.
Nor am I.
Yeah.
But the point being that you are 100% right. When he originally developed the submarine, it was surrounded by the sea of bonding and rapport. When I taught the submarine, I always used to see rapport as the compartment at the beginning and the shaft that runs all the way through to the propeller at the end. So it never stops. And I think the challenge that we have is that we need to stop weaponizing technique and we need to teach people how to communicate and to communicate in order to create real understanding. If you look at the objectives of our buyers, they're not wildly different across the board. If you sell into a particular market, the ROI stuff, that's all kind of de rigueur. But the real reason why they're doing it, who are they trying to impress? Which kitchen are they trying to buy? What leaderboard do they want to be top of? What are they afraid of happening? That's the real drivers. I've had clients buy my coaching because they wanted to keep their horse alive. Because he went lame and the vet's bill was 80 grand. So he spent 9 grand with me in order to make the money to pay for the vet's bill. The horse lasted 14 more years. That's why he bought my coaching. I've had people buy my training and coaching because of school fees. There are 2 pairs of twins out there that have been funded because of the results their mothers created from learning how to sell with me. Now, those would never have crossed my mind. There's reasons why people would buy my stuff.
That is the only reason people buy.
Exactly.
And it makes no difference what company, what industry. I've worked across industries. The common denominator is they're human beings. Okay. And human beings make decisions emotionally. You could be CEO, whatever. You are concerned about your job preservation, your reputation, how your kids are doing, how your wife's getting. You will make decisions on that basis. There is no logic. I mean, that's science. We know that. In much the same way as we know that the stick and carrot doesn't motivate anyone. It's one of the most researched areas in science. But what do? We keep paying people commission and using the carrot and stick methods of motivation, even though we know it's not doesn't work. We've got deep science on this. Similarly, we've got deep science.
If anyone wants to read up about this, Alfie Kohn's book, Punished by Rewards, it's a 2-hour read maximum. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
So it's a meta study on all the studies on compensation, recognition, reward, and the negative impact it has.
So does this go back to, because you're not going to convert everybody, and there are going to be some people, like for example, trading floors and people like that will just be like, whatever, we're just here to make money.
Absolutely. The Jordan Belforts.
Yeah. Does this go back to much more stringent yet empathetic disqualification? Because I've been guilty of qualifying customers and then gone, well, yeah, it's probably okay, and then it always turns out to not be.
I think we need to rethink our definitions of what work is, what we measure, what success is, because a conversation with a future customer is work, just because it doesn't land this quarter. So again, we need to start having people shift their thinking in terms of, well, if I spend my time building my medium-term pipeline out, and this has been borne out by Archie Watson, who's been on, Adam Wilcox, who was his boss. It took them 1 sales cycle to turn the ship from focusing on short-term to medium-term pipeline. And after 1 sales cycle, the medium-term pipeline started to land as short-term pipeline. And within 8 months, they were 600% ahead of their nearest competitor in the market with no new product in 9 years. That's the effect it has. A simple temporal shift. But then you're not in a hurry trying to transact all the time. Because I'm constantly trying to think, how do I not create the conditions where I trigger my buyer to see me as a threat? Well, if I've got no reason to try and close them, and my only purpose is to help them at the time they're probably going to be struggling, and I turn up and I'm timely, I'm relevant, I bring real personal value to them, the next time I call, they'll welcome my call. That's what I'm looking for. I want people to want to take my call, not to look at it and think, oh, fuck, voicemail.
Never done that.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. There was a piece of Forrester research some years ago which looked at senior buyers' perspectives on sellers, and I have to say it made very disappointing reading. But there was a quote in the middle of the report, a verbatim quote from a senior buyer who said, and I can remember it word for word, only 12% of the meetings I have with sellers has any value.
Yeah,
And I thought to
It will have
myself,
dropped.
sorry?
It will have dropped.
The worry is it may well have dropped. I mean, my coaching club is called the 12% Club now, because I don't want anybody who's been on any of my programs to be part of the 88% of valueless sales meetings. So I want you to be part of the 12%. It's horrifying, isn't it? I mean, you talk about sales mediocrity. Even if he put that quote together on a very bad day, it's still pretty awful.
Well, I think we need to focus on what we do want rather than what we don't want. I'm a big fan of a type of therapy called solution-focused therapy. And these are therapists who just don't give a damn about what your problem is. And actually, if we focus on what we do want, which is creating the conditions where selling is the most noble act we can perform in business, and we're supported by our shareholders, by our leadership, by our management, our metrics, our compensation and reward system, our recognition system, our recruitment system. That's the nirvana I'm looking to create. But I think the first point is to help people realize that they have choice. When someone says, I was only following orders, they still pulled the trigger. Okay, the decision to pull the trigger was theirs. They may have been coerced, felt pressure, whatever, but they still did it. I believe our job is to help our community make great decisions well when they are under pressure. Because I interviewed Jack Shamas a couple of weeks back. Now, he's a CFO of 45 years, and we distilled it down to what matters most. They want to make the right decision. They don't want to make the wrong decision. And what they absolutely want to be certain of is if it goes wrong, it will be fixed and it won't come back on them. That's it.
Marcus, let me jump and say goodbye to everyone. Dan and Mike and Sam, it was nice to reconnect. Dan, I would love if you can publish the book on the comments that you recommended. I would love to read it.
I will do that, yeah.
And I would love to connect. Patrick and Marcus, have a great day. Patrick,
Take
have
care.
a great evening.
Cheers,
Bye-bye.
bye.
Thank you
Bye.
very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I love.
It was
Well,
a
we
very
probably-
interesting tour in the car with him as well. I'm glad to see that he managed to stop and get a cup of coffee on the way.
Yeah, I'm having super jealous about the weather there.
Yeah, me too. I think where is he?
He's in Israel.
In Israel. Ah,
Tel Aviv, yeah. Yeah.
Again, I think what we need to do is we need to find what unites us. Those values, the seller code is a unifying force for us. It's somewhere that we can congregate around and something that we can say, this is me. I'm proud to be part of this. And to gently enlist one person at a time. I mean, if we were each to engage with one person and say, look, I'm doing the, I'm engaging with this community. I thought it might be of interest to you. And if everyone who's in the community were to do that once a day to one person, nothing more other than that and the link. Thought you might be interested, love to catch up, something like that. Yeah. And just make it easy for people to enlist. Just step forward, raise their hand, say, yeah, that's me. Because if we slow this down, it will go faster because we need people to volunteer. And that's the key to this. I think if I look at the majority of sales training, it's all about being hero sellers. Hero sellers are against something and they attract people who are looking to be defended. Now, as Simon Bowen said last time, if we vacate that space of hero, it leaves space for the customer to fill it. And isn't that what we're really about? Selling is about creating heroes in our customers, helping them create the story that they want in their lives, in their business. That's a really noble endeavor. I mean, can you think of anything more powerful than helping people make the right decision for themselves, whether it involves us or not? And there is an element of altruism, but the paradox of everything that we're doing here is it's the opposite of what logic and finance and economists tell us we should be doing. But let's face it, most economists were put on the planet to make soothsayers look good.
Yeah, most business leaders that have remarkable stories to tell are generally those that went against the grain.
Well, if you think about most of the economic models, they're designed by economists who failed at being good mathematicians, and then they ended up building mathematical models. And what they did was they took the human being out of this. Yeah, Adam Smith in the 1730s actually countenanced against all of this because he said that if we then put too much power and too much money in the hands of the mercantile class, they will suck the system dry and make it hellish. And the irony is, these are the people quoting Adam Smith because they treat sales as a pin factory, which it isn't. So how do we educate sellers to ask questions about, well, why are we measuring this? How is this serving the outcome? Can we get sales and marketing to align? We've been running our selling aptitude test, and we've got 87 responses so far. And what we're finding is sales and marketing alignment is only 7%. In 7% do they say that we have sales and marketing alignment. In the other 93% of responses, they don't. I mean, what does that tell you?
Well, it points to one essential truth. I've worked in a number of big companies, and frankly, I was a bit of an outlier in terms of how I ran my business units. But the overwhelming attitude was one of apathy. The fact of the matter is 90% of people are just happy to go along with it. And even when you create an outlier type organization, it's still, most of the people just still go along for the ride. It's really hard to get everyone, fight. It's just the nature of the thing. That's what happens.
It
right?
needs a brave manager like you. One of my favorite stories that you've ever told is when you brought your quarter end a month forward.
Yeah.
Think about that. To explain what happened.
Well, it's an American company, right? So it was quarterly driven, and there was this mad panic at the end of the quarter. And the interesting thing was that this is Prime Computer. The interesting thing was it shipped 80% of its product in the last 2 weeks of each quarter. So it had this whole manufacturing operation geared around this frenetic activity at the end of a quarter. It was just nuts. And then so I said, well, why don't we? These are statutory reporting periods, right? But we're a sales operation. Why do we have to buy it? Why don't we close our sales books a quarter early? So we'd be 4 weeks ahead of the financial quarter, would be the end of the sales quarter, right? And then we'd have an extra month to do everything. We wouldn't be trying to do it when the books are closed. And they all looked at me like I was nuts, right? And I said, what's the problem? So anyway, they wouldn't do it, but we did it in our business unit, and we made every quarter without a panic.
How many quarters in a row?
It was about, I can't remember now. It was something in the order of 16.
Excellent. So that's 4 years in a row you hit quota. What years?
Oh, they were back in the old days, right? So they were in the 90s, early 90s.
The early 90s was a recession, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, late
Right.
80s, early. Yeah, but that. But
No, yeah, but you're making the case.
Yeah.
The fact is, we are now repeating another recession, only this one probably significantly tighter and tougher, and probably lasting longer, with the added bonus of war on our doorstep and possibly a nuclear winter. Yay!
Yeah.
Okay.
You remembered that, Marcus, I don't know.
Yeah, because I remember the stuff that matters, Pat.
Yes.
And what you demonstrated there.
I said something.
Yeah, you did finally. But what you demonstrated there was taking an act of courage and doing it anyway, despite the fact everyone else said "fuck off." You said, "No, I'm going to do that." And how much less discounting did you do than everybody else in those 16 quarters?
Well, it was more than that, because like most American companies, we also had headcounts, so many in service and so many. We totally ignored all of that. So I had salespeople who were on engineering headcount, for example. They were just people doing completely different jobs. And people used to visit us and go absolutely frigging nuts. But mind you, it's $1.5 billion.
Did they complain about the results, though?
No, we were a $1.5 billion corporation. We were the most successful business unit in the world.
I'm sorry, say that again.
We were the most successful business unit in the world.
In spite of the fact that you ignored all the numbers game shit.
Ignored all that shit.
Really?
And we just, yeah. I mean,
but for 16 quarters, that was just an anomaly. It was a blip.
Yeah.
Without wanting to be overly glib, this stuff is evergreen. None of it ever went away because the channel remains the same. The elephant brain.
Yeah, well, I used to remember the quarterly meetings. All the regional managers come together for quarterly meeting, and we're in a downturn, and the market's gone soft, and all the rest of it. And I can remember asking one day, and I said, "Why is it? We have a really good quarter. We pat ourselves on the back for outstanding marketing techniques and great sales initiatives and all the rest. And now, when it's a downturn, the market's gone soft. Could it possibly be that our failure is also our responsibility, much the same way as our successes might have been?" Everyone at the table looked at me like this, as I was some sort of a heretic, But
well, that's the classic, though, isn't it, Patrick? Yeah, success is all down to us. Failure is also always somebody else's fault.
Somebody else. But I mean, that's the culture. I mean, that's pervasive, right? That's pervasive. We're all like that. We're human beings. I mean, I'm the same. I make excuses and cope as much as. So I'm not a bloody hero. I'm the same. I sort of bury a lot of my mistakes as well. But
so you've touched on another one,
guys. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm going to have to duck out.
Okay, I'm going to leave you with one question, Mike, which is what are the undiscussables? That's what we should be talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll give that some thought. Guys, pleasure to meet you all. And Dan, I sent you a connection invite. Patrick, we still haven't connected, have we?
No, we should do, because we're on the same bandwagon with value. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. One way or another, I'm not going to time at the moment, but I'll send a connection request.
Yeah, that'll be great. Let's do that.
Okay, Pat, you and I are connected. Marcus, I will pick up with you in the next day or so.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. Cheers, Mike.
Guys.
Sam, have you got what you were hoping for from this?
Too late. I really need to go as well. So it's probably good a time as any. We're just about finished. Yeah. So lovely to meet you, Dan.
Yeah, well, we're already connected on LinkedIn, so
Yeah.
And Sam's still on as well.
yeah.
Yeah, take care, chaps. And I'm about to get the tube as well now.
Excellent. Sam, did you get what you were hoping for from this call?
No.
Not completely, not completely. I have to be honest.
Okay, so tell us what
but,
you want.
Well, I just wanted to have a bit more discussions in terms of sales, scenarios, like how we use these rules in terms of the sales procedures that we actually went through.
Okay, so we're going to be
outcomes.
starting these calls on a regular basis.
Okay.
So the Sales of Force for Good community and the Seller Code community, we're going to bring them together and we're going to pick on those shitty, gnarly questions and deal with those scenarios. If you're interested in having an opportunity to practice, I run my practice labs. We can talk about that separately. But this is a community that's there to serve you. But equally, we're looking for you to commit in terms of what you can do to contribute. Not necessarily now, and only as much as you can and you're willing.
Thank you.
That's what we're really looking for. This is a community. It's not on us. It's on all of us. All of us are responsible to raise the bar.
That sounds good. That sounds great.
Cool.
That's a good note to end on, I think.
Take care, chaps. Great
Take
to
care.
see you.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.